Hi, beautiful people. I'm Yazzie, and I'm here to give some clarity to my situation. I have a really interesting story, and I want to take the time and really explain because it is not one simple thing. It's been a long ride of things which led to my current situation. I'm here to post my story so I can share it with the people in my life who have been wondering about what I've been going through. At this point, I am doing very well and have begun to walk on my own, without my walker, most of the time. I've had the fortunate ability to heal really well, and I am also stubborn, so I don't like people doing things for me. Along the way, I have had to fight the doctors because I know my body. Given I love a couple of my doctors, but I've been told over the past 14 years that I'm expected to die from my brainstem, glioblastoma, astrocytoma, glioma. They changed the name over time. So now I've learned to trust my intuition and body to tell me before anyone else. I just want to give everyone a rundown on what's going on with me. In a way, I've been handed the short end of the stick and have learned from the experiences I've had. But I am lucky that I've been able to keep myself looking like I am capable. It's been a long ride, but if I want to tell you the general gist. Basically, 14 years ago, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor, and I was mostly normal other than the fact that I had double vision and depth perception deficiency. That alone was really stifling. I found out about my brain tumor because I had double vision. So I went into an eye doctor. They recommended I get an MRI and got diagnosed with a brainstem glioblastoma in the pons. Since then, the doctors have changed the diagnosis and just called it a mass. At this point, I didn't know what to think because physically I was fine, but I had back-to-back neuro-oncologists telling me that I only had 12 months to live and to do chemo and radiation immediately to possibly keep it at bay. I eventually went to UCLA and saw a neurosurgeon there who asked me how I got to the appointment and whether or not I had walked on my own. He observed how I sat on the exam table and how I communicate. He said, "This scan is not you. It looks nothing like who you are." So he was, flabbergasted at the fact that I shouldn't be acting and moving so normally. Apparently the MRI scan indicated that I should be on death's door. I believe that doctor may have saved my life because he whispered in my mother's ear, "Don't let them radiate." The machines are not accurate enough yet for this part of the brain. Everyone was telling me I'm dying. I was supposed to only have 1 year to live. Yet, I felt fine. I never accepted it. I guess you could say I knew myself better than what they were saying. So I kind of was just like, no, all right, cool, bye. And I just kept getting MRIs year after year, even though all they wanted to do was chemo and radiation. And here I am 14 years later, and I'm still here. Everyone in my situation had only lived 5 years max, with radiation or chemo. But it's very different because mine didn't grow, just stayed stable or very minimal growth. I could not get a biopsy because the tumor was at the very center of my pons, the largest part of the brainstem, which links my brain to my spinal cord. Surgeries, including biopsies, were not done on this part of the body at that time. Then, in 2023, I was starting to lose endurance in my walking. I could not successfully walk far distances, and I was just getting a little bit dizzier, so I decided to ask again if I could get a biopsy. This time my neurosurgeon told me had performed this surgery twice and had seen a possible edge of my tumor from which he could snip some samples. He felt pretty confident, so I went ahead and scheduled it, because they said that it had finally slightly grown enough in the right direction, that they might be able to go in and get a little sample and see what it is. And I did that, actually, I think it was February 2023. I decided to do this because I was getting more symptoms and told myself if I could get a diagnosis of exactly what it was, or somehow they could find something that would help other people with this, or something similar, then it would be worth it. The surgeon wanted to get 10 tiny samples to have diagnosed, but when he got to the 8th sample, there was some bleeding, so he had to stop. The biopsy turned out to be inconclusive. And that led to, a slow decline in my overall functions. After the biopsy, I got really dizzy. My endurance stayed bad, so it was really just hard to function day to day. Because of this, I had to move in with my mother and got into a stable, supportive living environment. I was really good at, like I said, faking it to make it, but at that point I was working from home and slowly losing my speech and walking ability by December. By this time I had begun using a wheelchair, and twice I lost the ability to move at all and slid out of my chair. I knew my health was getting pretty bad before my biopsy, but I didn't expect to slowly get ataxia symptoms like my grandmother and grandmother, who also had dizziness and double vision. So it wasn't unexpected, but it did really suck. Plus, as much as I thought it was similar, my doctors always refused to admit that it was ataxia or in any way related to my mother's and grandmother's issues, so no idea. Basically, by this point, I was slowly losing normal functions like speech, walking, and I was dizzy 24/7. That remained the rest of 2023. Like I said, it's a weird story. So, December 2023, I came up on my 30th birthday with what I thought was chest congestion, ended up being aspiration pneumonia. Plus, I happened to get COVID on top of that. Between the 17th and 23rd, I was unable to lay down flat to sleep. I remember my lungs sounded like popcorn, and I had zero energy, so I would literally do my best to get to the bathroom. And it took so much energy that I had to just rest between that and eating. One day, it was so bad that I just laid on the ground because my back and muscles hurt from sitting up. I fell asleep for 30 minutes and woke up and told my mum to call 911 because I was really in bad condition. When the EMT came, they weren't convinced I had to go in, but I literally couldn't stand or walk. I had to tell them I need to go in, and they finally took me in. Once I got to the ER and everything, I started to lose oxygen, and my mum had to make the decision to allow them to intubate me. I was unconscious by the time they put the breathing tube in my throat as they were preparing for life support. When I woke up, I just remember I couldn't speak because a tube was in my throat, and just being so surprised by everything around me, seeing my siblings who live out of state and not fully sure what happened. I could barely move at this point because I had been hooked up to 2 IVs, and my arms were so sore from the blood draws. Before all of this happened, I was about 90 pounds, but within 2 weeks, I dropped down to 75 pounds. And I was so weak, yet all I had to communicate was a little board with letters and symbols, which, with double vision on top of that, it was so hard. But I did have a great nurse in ICU, so I wasn't too worried. Plus, there wasn't much I could do except lay there and heal. A bit later, they decided to take the tubes out and test my breathing. No good. Rinse and repeat 2 more times. Nothing, so I had to make the decision to get a tracheostomy, which was so hard to do because I was in denial that I couldn't breathe well on my own. So I got a trach, and by then the oncologist slowly popping in telling me that I need to start chemo and radiation right now because my tumor is showing aggravated swelling and possible growth. She insisted my heart would not last another month. They did give me an MRI when I was first coming in, and I guess all of the trauma to my body from the pneumonia and COVID put my tumor into a state of shock. It was hard to think of with everything else going on. But the doctors came in and said, do chemo right now. I said, no, I am 75 pounds. I need to recuperate a bit and I will consider it. They were annoyed, but I can understand why. Throughout my experiences at the first hospital, I had several swallow tests and soon passed, but it wasn't fun. I had physiotherapy, but also got dehydrated at one point, and they had to give me a lot more water through my IV and some more CTs and MRIs, but overall just continuous tests until January 18th, where I got moved to subacute care facility in Anaheim. I remember they took me at midnight and looking up at the stars while the EMT rolled me in, and I just asked them to stop for a minute so I could breathe in some fresh air, and just tears streamed down my face. When I got into the facility, it was so weird being in a room with other people, and all of the beeping from their machines. When I woke up for breakfast, I just remember it was completely different compared to Kaiser, but it smelled familiar like my Filipino friend's house, so I got settled fast. Plus, I got my first real shower, bath, that wasn't a sponge bath. Best shower ever. At this facility, I was consistently waiting for people to come ask questions, and for he physical and occupational therapists to get me to the workout room in my wheelchair. The occupational therapist would test and challenge my skills every day, and the one time I really got to cruise through the place. It was hard for me to cruise on my own because I didn't have a super strong voice, and I also didn't want to get close to many people knowing that they were going to be leaving or dying soon. Something that's weird being one of the only young people in a subacute facility. I did have great relationships with my PT and OT. I am still friends with one and have gone back to see them all and bring them pastries and flowers. It's fun, surprising them because they only knew me in my wheelchair, barely transferring, but they got me to a walker and crocheting again, so I owe them everything. They gave me a lot of hope in trusting my body again. Thank you, Tali, George, Serena. I love you. There were several great things about Park Anaheim, but one great thing was my doctor, Dr. Coley, who was a pulmonologist, and he was the one that watched over me and checked my track and later capped it and a week later removed it. In the facility I was and slowly weaned off steroids, but it had me eating so much and gave me moon face as well. Around this time I made the decision with my neuro-oncologist and neurologist to do radiation soon for 6 weeks in Anaheim. With this, I was at a point that I could take a medical transport van in my wheelchair, so I took that 5 days a week with my mum sometimes. At radiation, I was wheeled in and helped on a table, where I was strapped down with a mask that was pre-made to fit my face. It was hard at first because my whole body gained weight from the steroid weight gain and moon face, so I left with indents on my skin from wearing the mask for 15 minutes. Then, there was a machine that would go around me, the center of my face, because it was radiating to the very center of my head pretty much. I was able to choose music to my liking, which was very nice, but otherwise it wasn't really fun. I do have a lot of funny stories throughout all of my hospital and radiation experiences, but I will share that on another video if that is requested. It was nice to get out of the facility and see my favorite drivers. Plus, on Fridays there were farmers markets at the hospital I got radiation at, so I would zoom down after my treatment to get Hawaiian chicken or a smoothie. One highlight. The first week of radiation, I did have to keep my trach in because of the placement of my tumor, and they were worried that radiation could possibly cause growth, and if it grew towards my throat that I'd have trouble breathing. So after a week and no agitation from the tumor, I had my trach capped, which means they literally just put a cap over the breathing apparatus on my trach, and I was speaking fully with my own voice again. And after all of that, my voice and laugh have changed. After it was out, I was able to go home and I was using my wheelchair to get around and transferring to the bathroom. It was nice being home, but I still had several weeks of radiation. I didn't know that radiation could have a lot of side effects, and I'm glad my initial ones weren't that bad, like hair loss from the top of my ears down, and acne. But towards the end, around the last 3 weeks, it started to get worse. Gradually, I lost my sense of taste, but it wasn't that simple. It was like everything tasted like a mix between licking a 9-volt battery and sharp pains like taking a bite out of those tiny needled cacti. This was one of the worst things ever, so as you can assume, I did slowly start eating less and around. Then I was also on a very small amount of steroids, so I wasn't eating as crazily as before. Like I said, I also had hair loss, which seems to be pretty normal, but I only lost from the top of one ear and straight around to the back and to the other ear. The biggest side effect hit me hard 3 weeks after I was done with all the treatments. After my last day, I rang that bell and hopped in the car and went to Arizona to see my family, which was all fine and well at first, but slowly, after 8 days, I had a decline of function. I could not take showers without help. I could barely function and transfer on my own. On the 21st day, I got so bad that my brother-in-law and mother had to put me in the car, and I had like 20% strength, so I could barely help them. My speech was getting worse and I could barely eat, and it's not like I wanted to because it tasted like battery acid. I could barely hold my head up or move my left arm, and it just continued to get worse. Please head over to part 2